The two of them couldn't do anything, couldn't really get anything moving, couldn't really do much of anything. So what do you think he's going to be able to do now? Number one, he's 78 years old. Number two, the pandemic. Number three, the economy. Number four, education. Number five, how do you bridge the gap between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which is so far apart?
Yeah.
So how do you unite? How do you unite Americans with all of that divide?
The problem is Trump supporters are so Trump supportive that when you look at that voting map, I don't see red or blue. I see a very divisive country that's in pain. So you have people who believe that Trump has actually catered to their abilities. You know, these middle-class families believe that Trump has done something for them, but ask them if they still have the proper health care that they need. Ask them if they still have, you know, access to education, and not just the schools and community colleges, but colleges that cost a bit more. Ask them if they got access to Pell Grants. You know, these are things that, you know, when he was the vice president, when Biden was vice president, he spearheaded that campaign for gay marriage equality, even though many years ago, and he apologized for it, he goes, 20 years ago, I couldn't speak up and say that it was right because I would have lost my supporters, and, you know, and I understand that. But he came out when he knew it was right and said, you know what? I support this. These people deserve to be a part of our society with equal benefits. You know, he also realized that as a military man, the amount of people that were coming out with PTSD and extreme depression and were ending up on the streets, and he enhanced services for them at the federal level to help them get free counseling, free access to rehab, free medical while they were in those places getting those services. And Donald Trump came in and scrapped that whole plan. And it took Biden pretty much half of his first term to the middle of second term to get all the bills passed for that, to help militaries and to give access to their families for kids who had either been killed in the line of fire or had committed suicide. Those things are super important. People do not realize what happens when people come back from war. A lot of people will never know that. I don't even know it. I can't even speak to it, but I deal with clients who've dealt with it. So I know some stuff about it. So he also made, you know, in Delaware, he helped, you know, his wife and him spearheaded a campaign to help access services for single moms in Delaware. So they've always been helping people. And even Jill, like I mentioned earlier, she teaches at a community college, even though she's had offers from, you know, Harvard, she's had offers from Yale, because she believes that these people need access to education and to people from high calibers, you know, because she did graduate from an Ivy League school. So she believes that people should have access to that kind of education, you know, even at community colleges. So that stuff impresses me. So I believe moving forward, I think that Biden has been around this, you know, he's been involved in government for nearly 50 years. So I believe that he has the skills and experience to actually mend fences with Republicans to get them to come to somewhat of an even playing ground once they remove Trump out of the picture. When you remove the gaslighter from the situation, now you have the ability to work with people, because not all Republicans were supporting Trump. They were supportive, you know, they saved face for the party. But I bet you if you went to every senator and said, when you voted for president, did you vote for Trump? Half of them would lie and say, yes, they did, but really they didn't. Because there were staunch, you know, Republican states. I never thought I would see Georgia ever become a Democratic state. I never thought I would see that ever in my life. And clearly Donald Trump didn't. And even Joe Biden was surprised by that. He didn't think he was going to get Georgia. But people have spoken. People realize that they need Biden because Biden has the ability. If you watched his message tonight, his message was that level of hope that Obama had when he spoke. People are, you know, on Facebook, this is the first time in 4 years I've seen happy, positive messages. right?
Hmm.
And then you see the occasional person who's a Republican going, yeah, I can't wait until this goes to court. This is the kind of anger that Donald Trump has brought out in people. He's excused racism to an nth degree. The minute he didn't go against white supremacy or say it's wrong, and he said, some of them aren't so bad. There needs to be an amendment in the United States that if your president's a shady asshole, you have the right to remove him. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're going to see amendments come into play with the Democratic Party, because Nancy Pelosi has just drawn up an amendment to give the rest of the government, the House and the Senate, the ability to remove what she views as an unfit president. Mm-hmm. So whether it be...
That's not going to happen.
Well, I hope...
Give her no power. Nancy's almost dead. They're not going to give her no power. The reason I want to talk about Joe for just a minute is because it's really important to find out where he comes from, where he stood, what he did when he was in office, and what he can do now to change, to make things better for Americans that he couldn't do when him and Obama, which is a very important question, because we need to understand why couldn't he, first of all, the power of the first Black man being in president, and then second of all, an older white man that's been in politics, like you said, for 50 years, that they couldn't get done with those two, that he's going to now try to apply a new agenda with a woman, an African-American, a Spanish African-American woman, or just African-American woman. Now, I can just imagine what the Republican Party and those old white men in the Senate in Massachusetts are sitting around their table right now saying. Absolutely. So I know as an American, I know that Biden is going to get by with being Mr. Nice Guy, but he ain't pushing nothing past that Senate and that Republican Party without being beat up. Because if he got those same senators and those same Republicans, a lot of them were voted back in. Did you notice that? That
is right. But what's interesting though for me is like you said earlier, healthcare is a massive thing, and he was one of the ones that helped spearhead the Obamacare thing. Mm-hmm. Now the problem is that back then, that is when there was still no black marks against the insurance companies, right? Mm-hmm. Now the insurance companies have been dragged to task by Elizabeth Warren on countless times in the House. Mm-hmm. And I believe that they're going to put together a government. They're going to have people in places where Wall Street and big pharma and and overpriced insurance companies aren't going to be getting away with what they got through in the past. And that would be the biggest contribution to the American people. Because you know what? I have a friend's mom who's a Republican, and she needs a hip replacement and has no insurance. She's waiting for Medicare to come through. And what she thinks is that this was because of Obamacare. And I was like, I don't think it's about Obamacare. I think it's the American health system, period. And I don't think that it's a government thing. I think it's the government sidelined, people can pay for healthcare. People can pay for healthcare. People can pay for healthcare. You know what? There are people paying $1,200 a month for their insurance down there. How are people expected to pay that? How is somebody on $40,000 a year expected to pay for health insurance? And I think the Bidens, particularly with, trust me, Biden's wife is going to play a huge role in the public. She's a woman that can speak to women regardless of whether they're Democratic or Republican. And I believe collectively, along with Kamala and along with the people, if you put Elizabeth Warren in a position where it allows her to go after people, you're going to see a lot of change on Wall Street. It's not about what Joe Biden can do. It's about Joe Biden putting together a team, a house of cards that can't topple. Because the problem is, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I don't hate Donald Trump. But what I do hate is that he puts people in positions that are unqualified to do their jobs, like Betsy DeVos, Mike Pence, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Kellyanne Conway, Mitch McConnell, people who are just as dumb as can be. And that is why you see what's happening in the United States. Donald Trump alone didn't get to do this. He had a whole team of assholes to come and back him up to do it. So what Joe does is he doesn't need to be picking his best friends. He needs to pick the people that are qualified for the jobs. Pete Buttigieg, PhD, Oxford, great. Has military experiences in management? Great, perfect. Let's put him as the Secretary of Defense. That guy will fix the military. That guy will look for ways to cut money back. He admits that they spend too much money on military. Pete Buttigieg is the biggest proponent of that, even though he was part of the military. You know, you put Elizabeth Warren in, Harvard Law, knows exactly what she's talking about, you know, destroyed the bank of, you know, Wells Fargo. These are people that Joe has in his pocket. They all trashed him in the primaries, you know, saying that he was old. And I think even at one point, Kamala Harris told him he was racist. Well, he could have been that racist if he was picking her as vice president, you know, and she herself, because she's a woman of color, and this is her first one, she said tonight, I'm not going to be the only woman. She's like, I'm just the first one. And many little girls now get to realize that they can dream to do whatever they want in this country. And that is the problem with what was happening in the last 4 years, is women were not valued by that government at all. Not when you're talking about repealing Roe versus Wade. The minute you start talking about that, you've automatically seconded women. You've made them subservient to males again. And people spoke up. It's not, yeah. So like when you say what Joe Biden can do, what Joe Biden needs to do is he needs to support the team that are coming in, because, you know, when he asks Elizabeth Warren to do something, she's going to go, I'll do it, but I'm taking on Wall Street and I'm taking on Big Pharma and I'm taking on shady insurance companies. And if he doesn't say yes, she won't go along. She won't, because, yeah.
Okay, I want to stay on the blue side for just a minute. Now, let's get to Kamala. Which very few people are talking about.
You know what? We need to acknowledge the fact that she was educated at McGill University for her undergrad. So congratulations to her for coming to Canada and being part of our education system.
Okay.
So
I'm just saying that it seems everybody's focusing on Joe. I'm sure the axe will fall somewhere between the two of them when they're trying to decide who is to try to make the decisions in America. A young mixed black woman, Spanish, Latino, black.
She's actually East Indian.
And an older white man that, you know, young people and old people always butt heads, and then mainly older men who is a father figure always butt heads with the daughter. So I see that as being a problem down the road. Now, I want to stay on the blue for just a minute. Are you there?
I am. I just lost my thing. There we go.
Okay.
I'm there. Okay.
The reason I keep wanting to talk about the blue is because I just want to understand and make it clear to the audience that I'm not picking a side with Donald. I want to understand, what can Biden do now, because he was already in as vice president and he had the ear of the first African-American president, that he can do now. Is his job basically to just try to unite America? Or what do you think the first thing he should be tackling?
The first thing that he needs to tackle is the division in the United States.
And how does he do that?
Well, like I said, when you remove Donald Trump, you remove the head of the beast, right? And there are people who are Republicans who have known Joe for many, many years, that have been in Senate just as long as him. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see, once that's out, and when they see that Joe is actually there to work for everybody, because he has said right from the beginning, I don't care if you vote for me or not, I'm still going to show up for you today. that is the best policy to have because.
Okay. Now, another question I want to ask is because a lot of people are talking about this. And I find that it's simple. For me, I don't miss anything. But like I said, I'm trying not to take one side or the other.
Right.
You remember at the beginning, Joe couldn't decide whether if he wanted to run.
Right.
Why is that?
You know what? Joe Biden had probably, when I'm 77 years old, who the fuck's going to want me? But I think somebody said, well, you know what? Donald Trump's a year younger than you. And then when he saw the list of candidates, right? Because my first choice was Pete Buttigieg because, you know what? We need to support our community. Even if we don't think that they're the number one, we need to support them. Pete Buttigieg showed up. He's not like every other gay man. He came out later in life, you know, schooled at Oxford and learned how to speak Norwegian so he could read this book that was only available in Norwegian. Now, does he speak to every gay man on the block? No. And in fact, a lot of them came ahead of them and were ahead and said, you know, like especially in the South, they were like, he doesn't represent me. Well, of course he doesn't because he doesn't work at Starbucks.
So,
but you,
okay. So
yeah.
What do you think? I'm going to move in the middle now. I'm going to try to move to the middle because I want to connect the two.
Yeah.
I know you were frustrated with me asking you so many questions.
Well, no, I'm not frustrated. But like what I'm saying is they needed Biden to come in because they knew that the rest of the primaries that were up on the slate were going to come up. And that I think what the problem was is they knew that Bloomberg was planning to sponsor himself.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that Bloomberg would buy everybody out on that thing. But they knew the one person that he couldn't buy out was Joe Biden. Because people had wanted Joe to run for president for years. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was planning to do so at the end of his second term with Obama, but then his kid was diagnosed with cancer, and so he decided to be a dad.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So,
and
go ahead.
So what happened was the Democratic Party, you know, particularly their board of directors, because they have a board of directors of very elite people, went and said, we will make sure you get the most money to campaign with. And look what happened. When Joe Biden announced his presidency in the primary and he made it out and made it into the final, he made more money than any other Democratic presidential nominee ever in history. He had like $300 million by the end of the month. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Okay. Now, what I want to ask is this, do you think Joe is well?
I think that people are playing into that. 1 second. I have to put my phone down for just 2 seconds.
Okay.
Oh, fuck. I'm trying to cook my dinner at the same time.
Oh, we'll be done shortly, so we won't ramble. I'll get on to Donald in a minute, but I just want, no. I'm trying to connect it. I wanted to make sense.
So what happened, Stephanie, is they told him that he was the best possible chance and the only one that could be the head of state to fix this problem in the United States. Because I love Pete Buttigieg, but do you think, as the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and you know what, God bless him, he did some great things there. Do you think that he has the skills and the ability to fix an entire nation based on his resume? No. Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren was my diehard favorite to make it out of primary. I really, really wanted her to be the first female president because she's tough and she doesn't take shit. But you know what? The states is still not ready to elect a female candidate, right? And so the Democratic Party realized that the only one that could legitimately stand up to Donald Trump and to outmaneuver him game-wise was Joe Biden, and that was strictly based on his resume. Because you can't tell me after 47 years, he doesn't have extensions into contacts. Like, he has contacts from 40 years ago that probably backed him. Mm-hmm. Those people do not have those backings that were on that stage. So he, no matter how hard they tried, he wore every one of them out by the last primary. I mean, when he got Elizabeth Warren to finally bend, I thought she did it because he was going to make her vice president. She would have been a great candidate for vice president, but he was smart. He goes, I'm going to pick Kamala. She was the first one out, but she has a great resume. She's a person of color and she's female, and we need to start bringing that into our government. So there's a lot of things that Joe Biden has already done in his presidency that nobody else has. He's brought a female of color in, right? They run on a ticket together, so it's not like he runs and then he goes, oh, by the way, I'm electing Kamala Harris. They knew right from the beginning that when he announced that the vice president-elect was going to be a woman of color. So he's already done something that he never did as vice president. He's done something that no president has ever done. And he made sure the Americans were good with it.
Okay, just this question here, and then we're going to get on to Donald. We're going to get on to the where do you think the voters, who do you think the voters were for Biden? Who do you think the voters, what class of people you think were the voters for Biden? Or do you think it was across the board? I think it was one class of people, but I'm going to let you tell me.
I don't think it was one class of people at all. I think that it was a lot of people from a lot of places. I think that we had the old rich white dudes voting for him. But more importantly, I think we had the college kids in the blue states backing him. And the women backed him too. So, but what was interesting was in Florida, Donald won with Spanish people down there and the Cubans. And I'll never know why. So, but it seems like there was 73 million people who voted. 73 million people in the States aren't all from one class. So just like I think a lot of young people in red states voted for Donald Trump. So I think,
sometimes when I say class, I don't mean just the rich and the poor. Sometimes the middle class can be part of the rich class, if you know what I mean, because it just depends on what you're making. And then,
I think that a lot of middle class families voted for him because Trump said, I'm not going to raise taxes, and he didn't. He raised taxes on lower income families and then gave all the rich people their tax breaks for their companies. And Joe Biden said, unless you make more than $400,000, I'm not coming for your paycheck at all.
Now, let's talk about, what do you think that Biden did right to be elected?
What I think Biden did right is he didn't, every time Donald got the opportunity, he would slam him to the nth degree. So what I mean is he focused on the voters and he focused on his tasks at hand, and he didn't get up and he didn't go, oh, that fat orange bastard, this is what he's doing. What he did say, if I'm going to defeat Donald Trump to help you out, this is what I need from you. Trump would get up and go, oh, did you see Sleepy Joe the other day? So character assassination right off the front, right off the top, imitating him at his pulpit. Not acceptable. You're not running for last comic standing. You're running for president of the United fucking States. You need to speak like a president. Presidents don't go around mocking people. They don't go around slamming people. People think that Joe is not well. Joe has a stuttering problem. And so instead of stuttering, Joe will stop speaking and re-gauge himself. And he has talked to people about it many times. Yes, he's had a heart attack. Guess what? Donald Trump's had 2 of them. Donald Trump, look at Joe Biden. Look at his body compared to Donald Trump's.
Okay. So, all right. I understand where you are with it. Now, let's talk about the Donald. Now,
girl,
I know we can sit here and bash him all day, but honestly, Chad, did Donald do anything right?
He did do a couple things right. So let's talk about that. Okay. He did what he made an attempt to have homosexual decriminalized in African countries and the Middle East. So he did go, and you know what? But anybody would be able to say, you know what? Hanging them and throwing them off buildings is not okay. He also exposed a pedophile ring, which was the result of Jeffrey Epstein being arrested. And, you know, sadly, we'll never know the story because he killed himself in prison.
Mm-hmm.
But at least Donald had the ability to go, oh, you know what? Pedophilia, wrong. So he did those things. He did increase the job market briefly. And people think that it was COVID that ruined the job market. But the job market had started to fall just prior to COVID in the fall. And that is because of changes to taxes in specific states of federal governments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he did increase the production of oil in the United States. And he made it profitable again. Mm-hmm. People think that Joe Biden is against oil and he's going to ban fracking. And that's not what's going to happen. Kamala Harris has said she's against fracking, but Joe Biden has already said he will not support a bill that bans fracking because he knows that people buy those farms to make that money. It's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
So what Donald has done is Donald had, I'll give him credit, he did get on social media every day to connect with his people, but he did it to connect with his people. He didn't do it to connect with the country. Because if you said anything against what he was saying on Twitter, he would block you automatically. Mm-hmm. So once you take the voice of your voters away or your public away, you've already lowered yourself. As a president, you should be able to go, oh, this guy thinks that I'm acting out of line. Maybe I should reach out and say, I don't think that you understand what I'm saying here. But really, when you're saying that the terrorists in Senate are still wrecking your life, he's talking about the 2 Muslim female senators. So mm-hmm. he didn't do enough, as far as I'm concerned, to even last one term, much less be elected to a second. 71 million people said that I was wrong, but 73 million people agreed with me.
Okay. Now let's now that we're on the Donald. Now, I want to just say congratulations to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Absolutely.
For their win. And hopefully
imagine doing something for 47 years. Imagine doing something for 47 years, sitting through 2 terms of watching somebody reap the benefits of your work, and you finally get to be the one who calls the shots. That's fucking amazing. Now, will he make a second term?
We will see. We will see. Now, in all fairness, I like you said, Donald did what he could for America. He did a few things which he lived up to, and he probably had a lot more plans for America. But like you said, is now that before we didn't see the people really wanting to talk about their views. Everybody had a little opinion. I'm voting for Biden or I'm voting for Trump, this and that. But you didn't see that real outcry online that you're seeing now. It's almost like people, like you said, people said that they voted for Trump, but yet they end up probably voting for Biden. And they didn't want to say that online. They just, because their whole family or them are Trump supporters or part of the Republican Party, because most of the swing states are Republican states. Most of them, from Florida to, all of that, what do you call it, Wisconsin, those are all swing states. So where do you think Donald should go now?
Well, where should he go now? Well,
go now. I just had to throw a little funny in there to try to break it up because I can see that you're really thinking. So, and I'm trying I don't want the broadcast to be about us really bashing Donald, but having.
But I don't think it's bashing.